Actually, it didn't cost so much. I mean, well, I'm not gonna
It was a
say
great
how much it
honor,
cost,
I was
but I
told, to be a
designed it,
Playmate,
so it
and to
didn't
be
cost
Playmate of the
much.
Year was
I had a lot
apparently
of
like winning the Nobel
intention.
Prize for Physics, with the bonus that the prize was handed over by Hugh Hefner himself, instead of the dreary old King of Sweden or somebody. And what happens when the Playmate of the Year gets announced? Does anyone know who she is yet?
I know who she is.
Hefner's life with Carrie Lee was clearly idyllic, so it seemed almost like bad taste to remind him that he had once preached and practiced a different philosophy altogether. But I was only in dreamland for a day, so I had to be blunt.
Everyone always assumed, rightly or wrongly, that the man who got to play with the Playmates was you. Were you a kid in a candy store?
To some degree, yes. But the Hugh Hefner that is relatively not known to the public is an intensely romantic person and very sentimental. So, while very obviously it was a kid in the candy store kind of phenomenon, from the very outset there was never any kind of casting couch nonsense.
In the first fine flush of liberty and indeed power, when you were Playboy was a success and you were a young tycoon and so on, were you a Don Juan in the sense that you thought of conquest? Did you have a black book?
Without question. I went through a period, first of all, I went through a very unhappy marriage, and I came out of that, still searching for my own, sense of sexual being. So I was dealing with more than one thing. I went into my marriage virgin, in the sense that I had slept with only one person before in my life, the woman that I then married. Right after I was engaged, my wife-to-be had an affair and told me about it just a short time before the wedding. That, in combination with the Puritan background, had a dramatic impact on me. And I am absolutely certain that a part of what lay behind the establishment of Playboy was a throwing off the chains of personal hurt and indignity, and simultaneous with that, a quest for some better way.
Did you ever run into a girl with a black book of her own?
Oh, sure, of course, absolutely. Not only with her own little black book, but with code and things on them.
What did you think of a girl like that? What was your attitude?
I thought she was rather liberated. But I also think that the notion in terms of scoring is very limiting. And, I passed through that stage of my life fairly early, because a kid who has a sweet tooth, who is thrust into a candy store and discovers that he is going to live in that candy store for the rest of his life, starts after a little while thinking about other things besides candy.
Did you get sick of the candy?
No, I've never gotten sick of it, no. Because essentially, for me, it's never been a sexual trip. Essentially, it's always been romance that's really turned me on. And the remarkable thing, and for that I'm really grateful, I am as romantic a pushover today as I was when I was a kid. And I'm glad.
Let's go back to the beginning of the Playboy saga. What was the original concept behind the magazine?
All of the men's magazines after the war were variations on a true anarchy, and that dealt with a very macho kind of image of a man climbing a mountain, or playing poker with the guys, or killing crocodiles. And my own interests were a good deal more indoor related, and so that was the concept behind the magazine.
So how did you raise the money for the first issue?
That's a very good question. I never did. I quite literally borrowed $300 from the Lakeshore National Bank, which was the bank that I had my checking account with, and I was working for a children's magazine at the time as a circulation manager. Then I went down the street to the local loan company, and with my furniture as collateral, at this point I was married and had a baby girl, Christy. I got another $300. I formed a corporation, and set it up with two kinds of classes of stock, A and B. Half the company was mine for a penny a share. The rest I tried to sell for $1 a share to finance the idea. I then went around to anybody, friends, relatives, anybody that would listen to me, and if I had been successful, I would have sold $18,000 worth of the other kinds of shares. The reason that I continue to have between 70 and 80% of Playboy is I was never able to sell all those shares. I would get a few hundred here, a few hundred there. But the entire Playboy empire was launched quite literally on a total of around $9,000. And you really can't do that. It just happened.
I wish I'd been there. I would have bought a couple of shares.
Yes, well, there's been a lot of reminiscing from friends in terms of second thoughts. And indeed, a number of the pieces of artwork and cartoons and stories were purchased initially by not money, with shares of stock. And some of the people who invested just $100 or $200 at the time are millionaires many times over now because of it.
Why was it such an instant hit? What was it, just the girls, or?
No. I think that that Playboy was the first publication to arrive at exactly the right time to connect an editorial attitude about the possibilities of what life could be like. We were in a post-war period. You must remember that after the First World War came the Roaring Twenties, a party. And I had felt, growing up as I had in the Depression and in the Second World War, that I had missed the party. And that I had arrived the morning after when they were cleaning things up. And I saw in the period immediately after the Second World War, everything going the other way. Things were becoming very, very conservative. There was a strong anti-communist fear that was fed very quickly by 1950 by the Korean War. And we had McCarthyism here and a tremendous amount of red baiting. And it was a time of very flannel suits and conformity. And I just couldn't believe that this was all that the future held, not only for me, but for the rest of society. So what I began to express through the magazine was this other notion about life, that life could be something more than a vale of tears, that life could really be fun, and put the emphasis on that. And I think that the pictures only enhanced that image. I think it was the combination of the pinup pictures in combination with the editorial point of view that really made the difference.
The picture you painted of the reader at the time, the typical Playboy reader, he was someone who was listening to Miles Davis while he was holding the collected works of Nietzsche in one hand, and he was overwhelming a beautiful woman on a circular bed under a masterpiece painted by Picasso. Now, the truth was, though, wasn't it, that the average reader was a pretty ordinary Joe. In fact, he was a scruffy guy like me. He was getting his fantasies fulfilled, isn't that right?
Well, I think that the reality ran the spectrum. In other words, the cliche concepts that we would project in the magazine, and indeed some of those lines sound almost like they came from my first introduction to the first issue, were intended to be almost a cliche, to point in another direction from the direction that everything else was going. And I think that the fact that Playboy began at almost exactly the same time as rock and roll is significant. I think it was a period in which there was political repression, and therefore the other avenues, sexual liberation with its social implications, the music, were seized upon by the young people. And very quickly we were dealing with a runaway hit in which the pictures were seen as a key part, but it really was a lifestyle magazine almost from the outset.
What about the centerfolds, which was one of your breakthroughs? Mm-hmm. Were they reluctant to pose like that? Did you have to talk them into it?
Well, one of the things that we promoted from the very early on, and it began really with the second year, was the girl next door idea of pinup photography. Nudes and pinups in the past had been glamour shots, movie stars, or if they were nudes, anonymous, beautiful body against sand, or piece of coral or something. I tried to integrate the pictures with an attitude towards life. And what existed underneath that, of course, was the notion that nice girls enjoy sex just as much as bad girls, and that this whole notion of Madonna and whore is, this whole double standard thing is ugly.
But in those days, the picture the magazine was painting us of the life around you was a sort of terrific party where naked women were coming down water slides onto the dinner table.
I missed that one, but I understand the thought.
Yeah. But what you were really doing was working your head off.
And watching the nudes going down the slide into the celery. In other words, I was quite literally burning my candle at both ends. I bought the mansion in Chicago in 1960, and the first Playboy Club began in February of 1960. And I did the first syndicated TV show, a variety show called Playboy's Penthouse. It was based upon a party idea in the fall of 1959. So that in those years in the early 1960s, I began to quite literally live the life. But it was a matter of, running. And it was during that period that are sometimes referred to as reclusive, in which I was living in a 70-room house filled with bunnies and celebrity guests, and there were parties 2 or 3 times a week. And was not ever really what you would really call a reclusive kind of life, or some variation on Howard Hughes.